All right. Horayot, daf Yud Bet, Amud Aleph. This week we will be learning about a midrash having to do with the shemen hamishcha. The context in Horayot is about how there were korbanot that were brought for the nasi, the kohen, the gadol, the melech. If they did certain sins, there were certain korbanot they brought. And as part of that, the Gemara talks a lot about shemen hamishcha, the holy anointing oil that was used to anoint kings, kohen gadol. When is it applied? When is it not applied? And as part of that discussion, the Gemara talks about how the shemen hamishcha, the pasuk says zeh, which is gematria of 12, and it learns from there that the shemen hamishcha was 12 log. That was the volume of the shemen hamishcha, and it was created by Moshe in the Midbar, and it was never replenished. For hundreds of years, that same shemen hamishcha was used to anoint kings for centuries, and miraculously, it reminds us of a holiday that we're all familiar with. The shemen hamishcha never ran out. It never lost any volume, even though it was used throughout those years. And in the context of that discussion, another miracle of the shemen hamishcha is taught regarding Aharon Kohen. We'll learn the midrash, and we'll see a few different interpretations of what the midrash is actually trying to say. I personally like at the end. There's one idea by the Yun Yaakov and by the Maharsha, which I think kind of explains nicely what the Gemara is trying to get at. Okay, let's begin. Tana Rabbanan. Keshemen atov v'gomer. So in Tilim Per Kuf Lamed Gimel, there's psukim. Hine matov u'mana im shevet achim gam yachad. And then it talks about keshemen atov, this good oil. Sheyored al zakan zgan Aharon. It mentions the beard of Aharon, specifically in the pasuk, in the context of Hine matov u'mana im shevet achim gam yachad. And it also talks about how the shemen atov on Aharon's beard is like the tal chermon. It's like the dew of the chermon. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: Kemין shnei tipei Mרגליות hayu תלויות לאהרן בזקנו. There were two drops, pearl-like drops of shemen hamishcha, which hung down from the edge of Aharon HaKohen's beard. Amar of Papa, Tana, kishehu mesaper olot v'yoshvot lo b'ikar skano. So what would happen when Aharon HaKohen would be mesaper, and we'll see what does it mean to be mesaper, but pshat is when he would speak, these drops of oil which hung from the edge of his beard would miraculously go up and lodge themselves in the roots of his beard. Well, davar zeh Moshe doeg, and Moshe was worried about this. Amar Shem chas v'shalom ma'alti b'shemen hamishcha, because Moshe anointed Aharon when he made him the Kohen Gadol. These two drops remained from the anointing, and this miraculous situation would happen. And Moshe was nervous. Shemen hamishcha, you're not allowed to do me'ilah. You're not allowed to get any benefit or use it in any way outside the context of the anointing itself. So Moshe was worried that these two drops were a violation of that.
So benefiting Aharon by being in his beard?
So we'll get, yeah, good. So what does that mean? We'll get to it. Yatzta bat kol ve'amra, so a voice goes out and says, Keshemen atov, this pasuk from Tehillim, ketal chermon, right? It's like the dew of the chermon. Ma tal chermon ein bo milah, just like dew, you cannot violate the issur of milah, you can't improperly benefit from dew, from tal. Af shemen hamishcha, shebezakan Aharon ein bo milah. So too, there's no problem here of getting benefit from these two drops. Okay, you're not violating the issur milah. Aharon doeg. So fine, so Moshe was appeased, but Aharon himself was worried. Amar shema Moshe lo ma'al aval ani ma'alti. So he's just worried secondhand from when he anointed, but I have these two drops in my beard all the time, so maybe I have since then violated mi'ilah. Yatzta bat kol ve'amra lo hine matov manaim shevet achim gam yachad ma Moshe lo ma'al af ata lo ma'alta. Moshe didn't violate, you didn't violate. Hey, that's the Gemara in Horayot. Okay, so Shimon asked the obvious question: What is the story with these two drops of shemen hamishcha that stayed in Aharon's beard and they went up whenever he was misaper? What is going on? Okay.
It's not a question. It's just that like the Baskal only speaks in like psukim with remez. It's like it's each time it comes out and just says like a pasuk and there's like you have to work out what it's trying to say.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. So good. So first of all, why two drops of oil? Where is that idea coming from? So the Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah has a similar version to this Midrash. but a different interpretation, and through that we understand where it's getting this idea from. Amru, b'sha'ah sheyatzak Moshe shemen hamishcha al rosh Aharon. So when Moshe Rabbeinu anointed Aharon to be the Kohen Gadol, nirtav v'nafal achorav. He trembled or he shook and he fell backwards. Ve'amar, oy li shema ma'alti b'shemen hamishcha. He said, maybe I have chas v'chalila, chas v'shalom, I have benefited improperly from the shemen hamishcha. Hishiva ruach hakodesh ve'amra lo, hine matov maneim shev lachim yachad, kishemen atov al harosh ketal chermon shered. So here it's the ruach hakodesh instead of the bat kol, but it quotes this parak of Tehillim. Mahatal en bo milah, af hashem en bo milah. We saw that before. Kishemen atov al harosh yored al zakan, zakan Aharon. The pasuk says, just like the good oil on the head, which comes down to the beard of Aharon. So the Midrash asks, V'chi shnei zkanim hayu leAharon, ve'at amart hazakan zakan. It repeats the word zakan, right? And that doesn't make sense grammatically, right? It says, just like the good oil that drips down to the beard of Aharon, it should say, the good oil that drips down to the beard of Aharon. Why does it repeat the word zakan? Ela kevan shera Moshe et Hashem and yored al zkan Aharon. Rather, when Moshe saw, when he anointed Aharon a Kohen, he saw the oil coming down to his beard. He was happy for his brother as though he himself had the oil anointed. That's why it says zakan twice. His beard and Aharon's beard.
He thought he missed?
No, it means he was so happy to see Aharon anointed as the Kohen Gadol that the simcha was as though he had anointed himself, because he was selflessly happy that his brother had been zochet to be anointed as the Kohen Gadol. So I would argue that this is the source in the previous Gemara, even though it doesn't say it, for why you have 2 drops of Shemen HaMishcha, it perhaps is playing off the idea that says Zakan, Zakan. So that's why there's 2, even though the Gemara doesn't make the connection like the Midrash Maker Rabbah does. Good. If we go to the next source, Tanchumi Lamdeinu, so you skip down to the middle where it says Bo Re'eh. It's about halfway through in the middle of the line. So it says Bo Re'eh Chasiduto shel Aharon HaTzadik. בשעה שהציג משה את אהרון ומשכו בשמן המשחה ויצק על ראשו, נזדעזע אהרון ונבעט. Okay, so come see how righteous Aharon was. When Moshe anointed him, he shook and he trembled in fear. אמר לו משה אחי, שמא לא הייתי ראוי להימשך בשמן הקודש, ומעלתי בו ונתחייתי כרת. So we have an addition here, right? That he says to Moshe, maybe I was not worthy to be anointed with the oil. So now we're starting to understand what exactly were they afraid of. Right? They're not wasting it. They're being anointed. That's how you're supposed to use the Shemen HaMishcha. So the fear is that he was not ra'ui for it to be used on him bichlal. So it's mi'ila in the sense that he shouldn't have been anointed because he wasn't worthy to be the Kohen Gadol. Okay? And what's the punishment for mi'ila of the Shemen HaMishcha? Is karet, which is a very serious punishment. The Torah tells us you're not allowed to use it outside of its strict context. So just as a minor point here it says explicitly that the one who shook and the one who is upset is Aharon. If we go back to Vayikra Rabbah for a second, right, it said, "B'sha'ah sheyatzak Moshe shemen hamishcha al rosh Aharon, nirtav v'nafal lachorav, ve'amar oy li shema ma'alti b'shemen hamishcha." So it seems that that's also talking about Aharon, but up there it could be interpreted to be referring to Moshe as well, right? Because we saw in the previous version, Horayot, that both Moshe and Aharon were nervous. So it doesn't specify who shook, but in Tanchuma it specifies that it was Aharon, and talks about the Isur of Karet, and it gives a reason for why he was nervous. Okay? And going back to the Midrash Tanchuma Lamdeinu, right? Al b'sar adam lo yisach, third line from the bottom. לפיכך העיד עליו הכתוב, הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבט אחים גם יחד, כשמן הטוב על הראש יורד על זקן זקן אהרון שיורד על פי מידותיו כטל חרמון. הקיש שמן המשחה לטל חרמון. מה טל חרמון אין בו מילה? כך שמן המשחה, יורד על אהרון אין בו מילה. Okay, so we see the same idea repeated in various sources. We have it in the Talmud, we have it in Vayikra Rabbah, we have it in Tanchum Lamdeinu. Okay. The Marzu, which is a commentary on the Midrash Rabbah, says the following. He wants to ask, okay, we're talking here about karet. Okay, nitchayavti karet. So he has a diuk in the halachic sense. So he says, Mi umashi katuv nitchayavti karet. So why was Aharon worried about karet? Kemin amar b'kretut davav shechayav b'chol shehu. Okay, there's an opinion that says when it's discussing the Shemen HaMishcha, how much of it do you have to improperly benefit from to be chayav karet? So there's an opinion that says kol shehu, right? Any amount. So when Aharon says nitchayavti karet, it's according to that opinion. But there's an opinion that says no, the isur of karet by shemen hamishcha is only with an olive's worth. Perush kan v'nitchayev isur chiyuv karet. K'mo shekatuv b'reish Shabbat isur chiyuv skila. That when Aharon says nitchayavti karet, so according to the opinion that says you're only chayav karet with a kezayit, how could he have said nitchayavti karet? So the Marzu says it means he's speaking. I have become chayav in an isur which has associated with it the punishment of karet. Not that I'm chayav karet because I didn't do enough volume, but I violated a prohibition of which karet is a punishment with enough volume. And he gives an example from the Gemara in Shabbat where it says isur chiyuv skila, right? That if someone does something on Shabbat, they're not chayav skila, but they have done an isur where the chiyuv is skila if done to its fullest extent. He says Aharon has simply he's exaggerated on himself. He's been extra machmir on himself in his language. So what's weird about this marzu? In other words, he's clearly differentiating between the volume of kol shu and the volume of a kazayit. But Moshe anointed Aharon with shemen hamishcha. It's running down his beard. Right, so what? You don't think you have a kazayit's worth of shemen hamishcha if your whole body is anointed with the oil? Like, what is this? So perhaps the reference here is specifically to those 2 drops, because 2 drops is more than a kol shu, but less than a kazayit. What's interesting about that is the idea of nitchayavti karet is mentioned in the Tanchuma, which doesn't talk about the 2 drops. The 2 drops are in Horayot. Okay, so the Eitz Yosef notes this and connects the 2 versions to say that they're talking about the same thing, even though they don't say it in the same place. Okay, so first he says, what is Aharon afraid of? Why wouldn't he have been worthy for shemen hamishcha? Because he did the sin of chet ha'egel. That's why he thought maybe he didn't deserve it. It says in Parshat Ekev that Hashem was very upset with Aharon to destroy him. And therefore he was nervous that he was not so able to become Kohen Gadol. That's why he was nervous. Which is the Midrash on Tehillim, it says about the 2 drops. And so the Eitz Yosef says, when it says in Chayavti Karet, it's not that he's magzim al atzmo, like the Marzu says, and really he's talking about the anointing oil that poured all over his body, but rather that is talking specifically about the 2 drops. Okay, so basically Marzu, the Eitz Yosef is connecting the version in Tanchuma to the version in Horayot in terms of what exactly went on there. Okay?
The version in Horayot is saying that Moshe was worried he was Moel, and in the Tanchuma, it's Aharon that's worried he's Moel. So they're really different, like, there's different.
Yeah, Horayot says both. Also Aharon and also Moshe.
It says also Aharon. Only Moshe.
Right, and then in the continuation, ועדיין היה אהרון דואג, שמא משה לא מעל, אבל אני מעלתי. But you're right, it is different. You're absolutely right. It's different that both of them are worried, whereas in this version, only Aharon is worried. There are differences. That's the point.
אז מה החילוק בין 2 טיפות לשאר השמן? למה דווקא חשש מה 2 טיפות האלה?
כי שאר השמן היה כאילו כהלכתו. כלומר, הוא נמשך בשמן המשחה, כראוי, אולי, אבל 2 טיפות שנשארו אחר כך, ואיכשהו הוא קיבל הנאה, עוד לא הגענו למה בדיוק היה מטרת הטיפות האלו. זה אולי הוא חשב שזה הוא מועל עם הטיפות האלו, לעומת הפעם הראשונה שהוא נמשך, וזה היה כראוי. לפחות ככה אני מבין את זה. Okay, I think. The Ben Yoyada is just makes an interesting point here, and then we'll get into the kind of the main idea of the shiur. So So the Ben Yehuda says as follows: Hiksha Rav Yun Yaakov Zal me'achad Hashem lo yachaser klum b'ma shemoshchin mimenu de'adayin hu yudbed lugin shlemin. So remember I said in the introduction that the oil always was 12 log. It never, there was a ness. This is the Gemara says this explicitly. There was never any missing. Im ken lama choshesh mishum meila.
Oh, come on.
Why is he worried
Never-ending.
about improper benefit if it always refilled automatically? There is.
Great, thinking question.
It's
Can
the.
you smile if never finished? Is it the Mila itself or is it the traction of?
Oh, right, exactly. So it depends. I understand what is meila. Right, you can go into a whole brisker chakir here. Yeah, is the meila right? Am I improper benefit even if it gets replenished? Right, so.
It depends. No, but also depends how the magic works. Does it? Do I take some, and then, I've taken that piece, and then it gets its own, or when you take, it never really goes down. The chiluk is important.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. I think you're right. Yeah, that's exactly the point. So he says exactly like one of the opinions you just said.
Like serious business.
Right? It says you can't violate me'ilah unless there's some lacking that you have caused. Okay? So it seems that, in fact, enachinami, that when he took the anointing oil, he caused a lacking in the volume of oil. But it simultaneously, instantaneously fills back up. Right. There's a story similar to this with Eliyahu, Merkel does. Right? This should be for me for all generations. The Shemen HaMishcha zeh, zayinu mispar zeh, shehu yudbet lugin, zeh begematria. Naseh bo tamid, havaya chadasha, שבכל פעם שלוקחין איזה שיעור ממנו, anytime you took anything from the שמן המשחה, מתהווה במקומו שמן חדש, למלאות הפחד שנפחד ממנו. A new creation is simultaneously brought into existence to fill the gap. So that's how the Ben Yehuda understands the magic. Okay, good. Let's... in order to understand, I think first of all, we haven't explained what the idea behind these shnei tipin, shnei tfei mרגליות. What is the idea behind these two drops, and what is the Gemara talking about? So yeah, maybe it's zakan, but what? So to get to the point there, we start by trying to understand when it says Rav Papa, when he says kshu mesaper odot v'yoshvot lo b'ikar zkano, that when Aharon HaKohen used to be mesaper, these drops would ascend his beard and lodge into the roots of his beard. So what does that mean, misaper? So Rashi says it means when he would tell a story, when he would talk, misaper, right? He would speak. So Rashi says because when he spoke, his beard would move when he would open and close his mouth. So the drops would move up so that they wouldn't fall off his beard. Okay? The Ramah disagrees. The Ramah katav shu misaper shom she'ah medaber. There are those that say that it means misaper means when he spoke. Right, and the edge of his beard would shake because of his speech. And so these two drops would lodge themselves in the roots, so that they wouldn't fall. Very practical explanation. The Rama says, I say that's not what it means. What does misaper mean? Lashon tisporet, a haircut or a beard trim. Okay. וגילוח, היו עולות ויושבות בעיקר זקנו, כדי שלא יגזזו עם השיער הנגזז. In other words, when Aharon would get a beard trim, so these drops were hanging from the edge of his beard, so they had to go up so that they wouldn't get cut off.
Weren't Kohanim clean shaven completely?
What? Weren't Kohanim clean shaven completely?
I thought they had to remove all their hair.
That was maybe at the first when he was nimshach b'shemen hamishcha, b'miluim, like of the mishkan.
פעם הראשונה.
זה לא ההלכה שהם צריכים להיות תמיד, כאילו, ללא...
לא. הם פעם בשבוע צריכים להסתפר. כהן גדול פעם בשבוע, כהן רגיל פעם בחודש.
אבל הם לא צריכים להוריד את הכל?
That first time, well, it's a good question though. I didn't think of that. Because those two drops lodged in his beard, from when he was anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, and they stayed behind. But if he had to shave for the initial ceremony, he had no beard for them to latch onto.
That's not nice, and he grew a beard overnight.
After they shaved it at the Miluim, a beard grew. Or they hovered there until the beard grew in or something. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. That's actually a good question. Wasn't he clinching? I don't know. Anyway, that's the Ramah's explanation. I think about that. That's a good. So he understands it to mean from the language of a beard, but what's the problem with that answer? It's the same problem with Rashi's answer, meaning it's not a problem in the sense it doesn't make sense, but the problem is, so what? Okay, Aharon had this nest that he had these 2 drops of the Shemen HaMishcha that hung from the edge of his beard, and then when he got his beard trimmed, so then why is that miracle occurring? Okay?
To show that it's good what happened, that it's there. That he was Rowi, I guess.
As a constant sign that he was Rowi, like even after the initial anointing. Okay. That's one way to understand it. Let's look at the Iyun. First the Ben Yoyada. Okay? The Ben Yoyada says as follows. Perush Rashi Zal, Nira Dachuk Atzum. That when Rashi says Misaper means speaking, that seems extremely implausible. Me'achar ki be'emet hem b'nes hayu omdim. What does Ben Yoyada say? Rashi's explanation is when he would speak, his beard would tremble. Right? Aharon has a long beard, so when he speaks, so the drops at the bottom, there's a fear that they would fall off the edges of the beard, so they went up. Ben Yoyada says, we're talking about a miracle. So what you're afraid they'll fall off because he's speaking? But the whole idea is that they're there miraculously to begin with, so they can't miraculously stay there when he speaks. And the reason is the opposite of what Yonah said. Why is the idea of a beard trim difficult? The Arizal said, Amitim, his true words, that the Arizal says no one is allowed to ever shave their beard. You're not allowed to be clean-shaven ever, right? And so certainly that applies to Aharon HaKohen. Only to trim the mustache hairs that prevent you from eating. That was the Arizal's shita. That you have to be with a beard. So now the Ben Yoyada gives his interpretation, a third reason. Mishamesh mitato. The misaper means relations. And he gives a lot of examples of this. He says there's a lot of examples of this. Right? There's this episode in Nedarim where Ima Shalom is talking about her husband and said when he was misaper with me, and the context there is that they're together. So we see that the misaper can also mean having relations. Therefore what? He says there's a lot of examples. Fine. Panim keneged panim yachdav yeduvku. So he says when Aharon and his wife Elisheva were together, they're facing each other. ואז נדחקים השתי הטיפות האלו התלויות בזקנו. So when they're together, b'tashmish, if the drops of oil are hanging from the edge of his beard, there's a danger that they would touch his wife. And that would be problematic for purposes of Me'ilah, because she's not allowed to be touching them. לכן, בשעת תשמיש, כשהוא היה מספר, when he was with Elisheva, עולות ויושבות בעיקר זקנו. They would go up into the root of his beard, להסתתר שם בתוך שר הזקן, to hide in the roots, the hairs of his beard, כדי שלא טיפות השמן הקדוש נוגעים בבשר אשתו, so that these drops of shemen המשחה would not touch his wife Elisheva. לכך יושבות בעיקר זקנו, להתכסות שם בתוך השיער. And then he concludes, יהי רצון, זכות אהרון הכהן, עליו השלום, יגן בעדנו, אמן, כן יהי רצון. Which is a good bracha, right?
He's just drawing a separate line of where you know, Derech HaTeva is allowed to be, because like his whole protest was that like the whole thing's miraculous. So miraculous enough to hang on there for months on end, for years on end, but
right.
Not miraculous enough to not touch his wife.
I guess what he's saying is when they were together, his beard was long enough that Like, it touched his wife.
Yeah, but like, he has a problem with the whole like falling off thing. He doesn't have a problem with saying that it would touch his wife.
Yeah, I guess because they're close together and the beard would touch his wife. The only way to miraculously avoid that is if his beard like curled into, I don't know.
מלכתחילה הם היו שם בנס. אין חשש שהם יפלו, כי תלויות שם בנס. וזה גם דוחק את רש"י.
נכון. But I think he's not saying here they would fall on Elisheva. He's saying that his beard would be touching Elisheva. So it's right. But I hear your question.
The thing is, the main goal is to say to give a reason why it needs to go up, because Rashi and the Rama are not giving like a real reason why it needs to go up.
Right.
He's explaining that if it touched her, it would be a problem.
Right.
Therefore, it has to hide inside the other hair.
But he's actually also connecting it to Me'ila, unlike the other two.
Right. In other words, there's a lot of benefits to the Ben Yehuda's interpretation. It connects it to Me'ila, and it makes sense why they had to go up, unlike Rashi and Rama, which are just kind of okay. That's kind of random. At least that's how I feel. But I think the Ben Yehuda's interpretation is even deeper than that, and it makes even more sense than that, because it gets to the root of perhaps the why here. I'll connect back to it. Let's read the Yun Yaakov and then the Marsha, and then we'll see why I think the Ben Yehuda is kind of getting to the point. So the Yun Yaakov. Sorry.
Very literal this week. Look at this.
Thank you. Well, actually, let's see. Yun Yaakov looks a bit blurred actually. Where it says Kemין shtei tipei on the top screenshot on the left side, the first word. Kemין shtei. כמין שתי טיפי מרגליות היו תלויות בזקנו של אהרון. So the Yun Yaakov says, Ein b'marsha. I didn't bring the marsha, but he goes on and on and on and on. He has a whole pilpul on this Gemara, okay? So the Yun Yaakov says, you should read that, which we're not going to, right? ואפשר, ומעל גם כן שני בני, ומרמז גם כן שני בני אהרון הנותרים. Okay, so the Yun Yaakov says, why 2 drops? Because Aharon had two sons that died and 2 that remained. Shayu re'uyin lisaref. He says, Elazar and Tamar, who survived, should have also been burned. Ela sheschut Aharon garam shenitzolu. But Aharon's schut somehow didn't extend to Nadav and Avihu to spare them, but it was enough to spare Elazar and Tamar.
Nadav and Avihu died because they brought Ishar, no? The other 2 sons weren't involved in that.
That would be the simple explanation. He seems to be assuming that Elazar and Tamar were somehow culpable as well. But you're right. I mean, there's a whole other shiur on this whole question of the sons of Nadav and of Aharon and what they did wrong and who did what. But yes, Pshat is, like you said, Nadav and Avihu, they did something. It's not clear what they did. So they merited their own punishment, and it didn't have to do with Aharon, and the 2 other sons survived. But the Yun Yaakov is assuming that all of them deserve to be burned, but Aaron's schut protected Elazar and Tamar. Kedeita biyom adaf pezayin. Right, and there's a midrash that supports this reading in Yoma. V'zeh hayored al pi midotav. The pasuk back in Tehillim, if you remember, the pasuk said, "Zakan zkan Aharon hayored al pi midotav." That the shemen hamishcha drips down from his beard onto the skirts of his. What's it called? Like the midotav, or the edges of his, not his dress, his whatever men wore. What? His tunic. Yes. Thank you. So what does it mean? Garmushin itzolu. So it interprets midotav not as the edges of the tunic, but midot. Right? Hayored pi midotav. That these drops were able to be yored on his zakan because of the midot of Aharon that were able to spare his sons, which they were a zecher for. ולכן כשהיה מספר, and so when he would speak, היו עולות ויושבות בעיקר זקנו. In the second screenshot on the right side. לרמוז לו שלא יתרעם גם כן על שפגע בו מידת הדין בפיו. So what does it mean that these drops went up? Why did the drops go up? What do they symbolize? For Yaakov, they symbolize his sons. And so they went up when he would speak to remind him. The miracle was to remind him, hey, remember that your 2 sons died. Remember that your 2 sons were spared. And that should Just keep that in mind. V'zeh vaydom Aharon, and that's what it means by vaydom Aharon when Nadav and Avihu were killed. Shekibel schar shitikato. Right? The Midrash says the fact that he was silent, he got schar for it. That he didn't protest the fact that Nadav and Avihu were killed. So what's nice about this interpretation of Yaakov is that Aharon HaKohen was anointed during the Shivat Yimei HaMiluim. Right? That there was the whole ceremony during the Hakamat HaMishkan. And at the very end of that ceremony is when Nadav and Avihu were killed. So it's connecting when he was anointed with the Shemen HaMishkan, when these two drops hung from his beard, to that same event, something happened which is where the drops came from, or what they symbolized. So that's the Yaakov's understanding of the drops. And then if we just go to the Marasha, so just taking a tiny portion of what he says as follows. Rotzelomar, shezacha Aharon, sheored shemen hamishcha. So why does he have these two drops? What do these two drops mean? Right? So we saw already the Yaakov said this, when the Pasuk says, Hayored al pi midotav, it means that his midot had something to do with these drops. Shayu lo b'fiv, shaya mesaper. So what does mesaper mean? So the Marsha actually redeems Rashi's original reading. That mesaper means speak. Right? He used to speak. But speak about what? Mesaper u'medaber shalom ben ish lechavero. Right? Aharon is ohev shalom, rodef shalom. So, k'shaya mesaper, right, if you go back to the Gemara in Horayot, it says, k'shu mesaper olot v'yoshvot lo b'ikar skano. These two drops would go up into the roots of his beard whenever he spoke. So it means, because of his midot, that when he spoke in order to bring peace between warring parties. V'alzeh amar, k'shu mesaper im acherim, when he would speak to others, dahin lasot shalom benehem, to make peace between them, hayu olot v'yoshvot lo. L'romos shebischut zeh, hu zocheh, שלא יהיה למשכיהו הפסק. ואמר שעל דבר זה שראה אהרון היה משה דואג, לפי שהוא היה גם כן כהן גדול, ולא זכה לשני טיפין שהבטיחו השם יתברך ברוך הוא על שתי משיחים, שלא יפסקו מזרעו. Okay, so this ties, okay. He goes on a whole thing about the Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, and that's what the two drops symbolize. But that's what the two Mashiachim and the Mashiachav means. But the idea that I want to bring here, is that the two drops here could perhaps be symbolizing Kshayu Mesaper. Why did the drops go up into his beard? To show that what Aharon was doing was being, he was like bringing peace between two people. So these drops went up to symbolize something about that he was someone who brought peace. And so the drops, instead of dangling from the edge of his beard, then went up into the roots of the beard. And to go back to the Ben Yoyada, the reason I like the Ben Yoyada's reading is that he talks about how when Aharon is with Elisheva, right? And the whole idea of Meila is that even Kol Shehu or Kazait, you can't use it improperly, right? And the life of the Kohen Gadol, and what the Sermon HaMishcha symbolizes, the life of the Kohen Gadol is a life of consecration and purity, that everything you do has to be done L'Shem Kedusha, L'Shem Shalom. And so these two drops, like the idea that they went up into the Zakan, even when he was with his wife, so they wouldn't touch Basar Ishto, it shows that his whole life was a life that was consecrated. Even when he's with his wife, it needed to be done in a particular way, right? That's what being a Kohen Gadol was. And the Shemen HaMishcha was kind of emblematic of that. And if we take, and with this, I think I'll finish, we take the reading of the Iyun Yaakov and combine it with the reading of the Ben Yoyada. Even though they say two different interpretations, I'd like to say as follows. The Iyun Yaakov said the two drops symbolize the sons of Aharon, right? The Nadav and Avihu who died, it symbolizes Elzani, Tamar, and Tarim. And the Ben Yoyada says the two drops would go from the edge of his beard up to the roots when he was with Elisheva, right? And when Aharon was with Elisheva, like that's what led to the birth of his sons when drops went from up down. Does that make sense? Meaning when Aharon was with Elisheva and he was Zera, like when he would impregnate her with his seed, B'kedusha, it led to her giving birth to those sons. And the drops going back up into the roots of Aaron's beard like symbolizes the idea, perhaps, that when Aharon was with Elisheva, it had to be done B'kedusha, because when it's done B'kedusha, it leads to the Banav and Notarim, and not the Banav that are burned. Something like that. The idea isn't fully fleshed out, but I think there is a way to connect between the sons of Aharon, and then the fact that when he was misaper with his wife, that
It's symbolic though, because the sons were around a lot before he became Kohen Gadol, no?
Yeah.
It's a symbolic thing about
Right.
relations.
yeah, right. I think so.
Yeah, but you have the whole few things. One can, you can come up with the first of all, you think of it as compared to the, if you like, parents to lose their children in the army. Sometimes they tend to put on their dog tags and walk around with their dog tags, or there was the whole time where, obviously before this this round, but when the amount of soldiers in captivity were few, they had these dog tags, if you like, and their names. Anyone who was missing or in captivity. So people just carry around put them on and walk around with them. So in other words, to remind him of his sons, even though he didn't say anything, but Dom Aharon is it just comes to show he remembers his sons, or is there to remind him. And by the way, you think of it, if it's at the end of his beard there, so it's like right against his heart area. It means he has his son's memory, or his son's burden against his heart.
Yep.
So, and that's another thing, and also one can add, if we're already bringing that into the idea that he was the whole idea of peace, because there are two kohanim who are given the Shemin HaMishcha. There's the Kohen Gadol. Mm-hmm. In theory, he's supposed to bring peace, and even when the Rotzech B'Shgaga goes, he's in the Ir Miklat, and he's not, so he's just sitting there waiting until the Kohen Gadol dies and to be released from that place.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's the concept of the Kohen Gadol gives the concept of peace. And what's the second drop, if you like, is for whom? It's the Kohen Mashuach Milchama. Right. Is the guy who's in charge of war. Mm-hmm. So again, you can also look at it that way.
Interesting.
Of the
et milchama ve'et shalom.
Yes. So if you want to also look at it that way. But I think in general that's the
Yeah, I hadn't thought. I mean, what you said makes a lot of sense. That what the Yun Yaakov is really saying is these drops hang at the edge of his beard. It's kind of making sure that it's a constant reminder, like the dog tags. I think a lot of these explanations, there's obvious significance to the fact that the drops went up and lodged in the roots of the beard, and I don't think I fully understand really what the idea behind that is specifically. In a lot of these explanations,
well, if you like, the roots of the beard or the roots of the hairs, you think maybe since it was at the end of the day, the oil was dropped, and whoever went through the process of getting the Shemin HaMishcha, it was on his head.
Right.
It means, in other words, if you like, you can understand as if the oil went into the skull or into the brain or as a part. Because if you think about the whole concept of, speaking of the connection with Elisheva, I think if you think of the concept of reaching his brain, or the brain as a trigger for the hormones and for everything that connects, if you like, with the whole with the process. So yes, so the trigger of the trigger that comes from the brain, or the I don't know what the right terms in the English, yoteret hamoach, where the hormones come from, and the trigger for the eventually for the consummation of that at the end of the day, and then the connection with Elisheva. Eventually, that again, I guess, connects with the whole concept of what we see, especially in Sefer Bereshit, of ladat, to know.
Yep.
The connection between the brains. So I think the oil has immersed in his the roots of his beard is. The end of his head, his brain, so I think it starts from there, it connects to there. If you think about it that way. So that also on that end you can also understand that, because especially if you understand what the whole concept of B'Gan Eden Mikedem, the concept of the splitting between Adam and Chava, if they were connected back to back, where was the connection done? It's the spine, the cortex, the whole. The connection, the real connection, if you like, between them. I think that's where the roots of the oil goes to, by the way. So, yeah, just my thought.
Of course. Yeah.
Good.
Right.